Hey everybody, welcome back to this week's live stream on Synapse Care Solutions. And we are wrapping up the end of the month, and it has been all about social and emotional caring in the NICU. We have covered a range of topics from grief to hope and racial inequalities, and so much more. So this week, we're wrapping up with a presentation from Dr. Claire Sorenson, a NICU nurse who is specializing in compassion fatigue and toxic behaviors in the healthcare settings. So I really hope that you take away some nuggets. We had a really fun time with his presentation back at the One Conference online in 2021, and you'll see some of our moderators, our planning committee, and community who were interacting throughout the presentation and at the end. So I'll see you at the end of the presentation.
All right, so we are going to just jump right back in. Our speaker is Claire, and she's going to be presenting on Don't You Know You're Toxic? Claire was born and raised in Wisconsin. She specializes in high acuity, high stress environments of the NICU, PICU, and healthcare quality. She has spent nearly 15 years practicing within healthcare settings at every level, from top-tier academic medical centers and urban epicenters and world-class healthcare accreditation organizations to severely under-resourced makeshift facilities in developing countries. This wildly opportunity to find the common threads that affected teams all over the world, regardless of location or departmental makeup, the negative and largely preventable effects of compassion fatigue, emotional exhaustion, and burnout affected not only each individual employee, but also the team, department, and the institution as a whole. As her experience and evidence grew, Claire chose to make compassion fatigue the subject of her doctoral dissertation. For almost a decade, dedicated herself to researching, writing about, and strategizing specific tactics while predicting and preventing future challenges. Her work led her to realize the value of not just fighting compassion fatigue, but also improving workflows, team building, leading collaborative groups, developing powerful programs, and improving staff wellness. She tackles these issues head-on through her continued work at the bedside in her consulting firm, Clinician Matters Group, LLC. Take it away, Claire.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you for continuing to hang out with us. I know you've got a lot of places to choose to be, and I'm excited you all chose to be here with us. So like the introduction said, we're going to look at the vicious cycle between toxic behaviors and burnout in the NICU. And these strategies we're going to talk about this evening are actually going to be applicable across all different care environments, but being that this is the Synapse One conference, we're going to focus on the NICU. So we have a few objectives tonight. Primarily, we're going to define the concepts of toxic behaviors, compassion fatigue, and burnout. We're going to describe how toxic behaviors, compassion fatigue, and burnout can become a vicious cycle that we can easily get trapped in. And we're going to outline 2 strategies to stop or change our behaviors, our colleagues' behaviors, and our leaders' toxic behaviors, because it isn't just an us problem, it's a system problem. We're also going to list at least one strategy to stop or change toxic behaviors and to break the toxic cycle, which hopefully will decrease compassion fatigue and burnout in your NICU. So who I am, the introduction actually says it probably better than I could tell you right now. I've worked in NICUs and PICUs, I've worked in case management. I also worked at the Joint Commission writing international patient safety standards. I've developed pediatric cardiac programs all over the world. And then I've also worked as a leader in developing community hospitals in Chicago. My passion continues to be the NICU. It's where I started. Every time I've gone away from it, it's pulled me right back in. So like we said, I went into all of these environments and I saw this common problem and I didn't have the language for it. I stumbled into compassion fatigue and burnout accidentally. My dissertation originally was going to be on surgical outcomes in kids born with disorders of sex development. Something we rarely see in the NICU, but when we do, it's really important that we have open communication with our families. So I started looking at the decision-making process with families and ultimately shifted to what that meant for us at the bedside as nurses, as the people who are foremost talking to our parents and seeing them and witnessing this decision process. And it sort of shifted into this compassion fatigue space. So like the introduction said, I've worked in all of these environments, and regardless of how well resourced they are, how good the leaders are, how good the staff are. There's always been just this continued burnout and compassion fatigue, and I wanted to figure out why. So that's why I started Clinician Matters Group. So basically, I go into organizations and I evaluate them and see what individual problems are and help leaders identify those causes and develop a plan to get rid of them to help keep our healthcare practitioners, us as nurses at the bedside, healthy and engaged and able to provide good care, not only for our patients, but for ourselves and for our own families. So compassion fatigue and burnout are indeed, actually, before I get into this, if you don't mind, just in the comments, type out if you're a staff nurse, if you are a charge nurse, a leader of some sort, of shift coordinator or manager, that would be really helpful to me. So burnout, we all know, is kind of associated with emotional exhaustion, right? We hear a lot about it in the news right now. It's all over CNN. It's been in NPR. It's really this kind of up and coming term post-COVID. It is, however, really more related to the cumulative stressors of a job. So it's not something that comes on abruptly, right? It's something that happens when we feel like we don't have the resources available or we don't have enough support to meet the needs of our job. So if we don't feel like we're able to provide the best care to our patients because of system problems, that's when we start to burn out. So it is a gradual onset. There are some physical symptoms, so things like headaches, fatigue, difficulty focusing. We separate ourselves from our work a little bit because it's a protective mechanism. So we'll have a reduced sense of personal accomplishment, something I know is important to all of us as NICU nurses. We'll have low job satisfaction, and we'll start to feel discouraged that we're making a difference in our job. So things that cause burnout, like I said, it's not only just feeling like you don't have the resources to do the job, it's feeling like you don't have any control over your work. So if you think about the times that your unit leaders or hospital leaders have made decisions about your job, about your role, without your input or representation from the nursing staff or the physician staff, depending on what your role is, those are risk factors for burnout. Lack of recognition for good work. If you've come in and worked extra and you're not thanked, if you're precepted and it's just, you're expected to do it, if you've managed to do something really big on your unit, decrease in infection rate, and it's just, another day, another dollar kind of situation, that really can start to take an internal toll on us. If you have unclear or overly demanding job expectations, that can also cause burnout. So if you think about when you've got multiple services working with one of your kids, right? Think of one of your most complicated kids you've taken care of. And you've got neurology service saying one thing, you've got ID saying one thing, you've got your neo saying another thing. That really puts you in the middle and it centers you in a conflict. And that creates a perfect storm for burnout developing. Other things that cause, and this is interesting because we operate in both of these spaces in the NICU, right? So there's work that's really monotonous, unchallenging. So if you think about the fact that we feed our kids on a schedule, 8, 11, 2, 5, we draw our labs at 4 a.m., you know that's going to happen every single day, every single shift. That can start to feel really monotonous. You know what a kid's going to look like as a 32-week off CPAP. You know what a kid who's boarding from MBU is going to look like, who's just getting antibiotics, right? So that's one side of it. Alternatively, working in a chaotic and high pressure environment can also lead to burnout. So think about that mom who walked in off the street, no idea she was pregnant, you know nothing about her prenatal history, or crashing a kid onto ECMO, right? So we're right in between of those two risk factors as NICU nurses. So there's also personality traits that can contribute to burnout. I know none of us in the audience have these because this doesn't sound like any NICU nurse I know, right? So we're perfectionists. Nothing is ever good enough. Now, I don't know about you. I have a very particular way, like my IVs taped. I was never a NICU nurse who was very particular about the bed as long as it was clean, but I know there's all of us out there who are picky about our beds. If you have a pessimistic view about yourself or the world. So if you feel like you've got that imposter syndrome, you know what you're doing, but maybe somebody's going to find out that you don't. If you feel like nothing you ever do for your patients is quite good enough, you could always do just a little bit more. All of that really factors into burnout. Also, the need to be in control of our environment. And again, this doesn't sound like any NICU nurse I know, right? We don't want to control the light or the sound or the temperature. We certainly don't double and triple check our go bags or our delivery beds. All of that is stuff that we need to control. And it's very important that we do, right, for the safety of our patients. But that puts us at risk for burnout, feeling like we need to be in control of our environment at all times. Last but not least, high achieving type A personality. Again, certainly nobody here who's spending their night on a conference is a type A personality and a high achiever. So compassion fatigue is a little bit different. There's a lot of common threads here. Some of the similarities, though, are going to be those symptoms. But compassion fatigue was initially discovered or spoken about by a gentleman named Charles Figley. He was studying something called secondary traumatic stress in genetics workers and trauma workers. Basically, he said, a result of ongoing and recurring exposure to other people's traumas, something we experience every day in the NICU, right? Our parents are being traumatized just by simply having a kid admitted to the NICU, is trauma that we are exposed to. This woman, Sorenson, came along and she started researching ER nurses, actually. And she decided compassion fatigue was a better name for the same exact phenomenon. So compassion fatigue is a bit more abrupt. It's related to traumatic memories. And the symptoms can be a little bit different. So we talked about how you could still have the headache, you could still have the fatigue, you could still have some GI issues. But the biggest difference is really you're going to try to avoid those emotional situations. If you've taken care of a kid who was being cooled and it ended very badly, and you either didn't or couldn't deal with it, or perhaps you thought you did and it's just deep down inside in you and it comes up again. You have another kid who you're assigned to who's on cooling. You just can't engage with that family and with that baby in the same way you did before. It's a protective mechanism that you've put in place. So from an emotional standpoint, you might have some mood swings. You might be particularly irritable. You could be depressed, have poor concentration or judgment, all of which is really important to us in being successful at the NICU bedside. You'll also maybe find some less meaning in your work, decreased empathy. Basically, you're having a harder time compassionately engaging with your patients and with your families. The biggest risk factors are going to be the frequency and the intensity of exposures to other traumas. That's why so many studies have been done on neonatal and pediatric nurses. We are constantly being exposed not only to our patients and their experience of trauma, but our parents and our families as well. So things like our emotional intelligence, our level of experience, and our own personal coping mechanisms are going to determine how badly we experience this compassion fatigue. We can prevent it through things like self-care, and as nice as bubble baths are, it's really more of having those good, solid resilience information already programmed into us as professionals, which we can gain through education, hopefully on onboarding and continuing education on our units. Teamwork and communication are also going to be key here for us. Additionally, workplace environment and our leadership's impact is going to be really helpful. So if you have leaders who are engaged, who are constantly coming around, checking on how their staff are, perhaps relieving you after you've had a particularly traumatic patient death or code or whatever it happens to be, is really helpful. Both of these, compassion fatigue especially, has been reported as one of nurses' top intentions for leaving the nursing profession, not just their job, but the profession as a whole. So 30% of healthcare workers have seriously considered leaving the profession in the last year. Now, granted, this number is probably a little bit skewed because of COVID, right? But I think we still need to be alarmed by this. That's a huge amount of people that are getting ready to leave, or at least considering leaving the profession, in professions that are already short-staffed. We are absolutely hurting as healthcare workers. So a study recently came out by the Washington Post-Kaiser Family Foundation, and it showed all of these things. 93% of healthcare workers experiencing stress. Shouldn't be surprising, right? We have stressful jobs. 86% reported anxiety, 77% experienced frustration, 76% reported exhaustion and burnout. We can't keep operating if we're on an empty tank. 75% said they're overwhelmed. 82% said they're emotionally exhausted. Again, how are we supposed to engage with our patients if we have nothing left in the tank? 70% said they're physically exhausted, and 63% experience work-related dread. That means nearly 2/3 of healthcare workers wake up to go in for their shift and are dreading going in. Now, I don't know about you, that's not the sort of person that I want taking care of my family members. Not because they're any less skilled, any less intelligent, but I want somebody who wants to be there taking care of my loved one. Now, in addition to what this means for patient care, right? Like none of that is good. The other thing we need to think about for the leaders on the call, we need to think about what it means when somebody leaves the bedside. One nurse leaving the bedside, the cost of a turnover of one nurse is between $37,000 and $57,000 to replace a nurse. Can you imagine what your unit could do with $50,000? Now think about how many nurses you've had to replace in the last year. How much money is that for your patients, for new equipment, for new education, for more PTO so you can take a proper break? That is a crazy amount of money. That is $729 million a year just for the US to retrain nurses for positions that were previously filled. That's bonkers money. I realize I just got on a roll, so if you don't mind, let me know who's on as staff and who's here as leaders. That'd be helpful.
Yes, so we got a pretty good mix of NICU folks here. We've got some clinical leaders, some neonatal nurse practitioners, we've got some staff nurses, we've got people from rehab therapy, some PT, OT, and speech language pathology, and some clinical educators as well.
Amazing. Thank you. That's going to be really helpful because we talk about interdiscipline reactions soon. So moving forward, we've talked about compassion fatigue and burnout. We've defined those, so we've met that objective. So let's talk about toxic behaviors and toxic environments. The Joint Commission actually, after I left, now talks about toxic behaviors and environments in their standards. This is because the world now understands how impactful these things are to patient care and to outcomes on patients. And we, of course, want our kiddos to have a good experience and get out with as few complications as possible, right? So 60% of new nurses quit their first job within 6 months of being bullied. That's a huge number, right? 1 in 3 new nurses consider leaving the profession as a result of bullying, not just their job, but the profession as the whole. Now, I don't have the stats for our PT, OT, SLT friends online, but I can't imagine it's all that different. And can you imagine just a third of the people getting started with your team not only want to leave your team, but they want to leave the entire profession? That's huge. And we are not in a position to be driving people out of this profession so much. So when we think about toxic behaviors, they're really pretty wide range. There are things like shaming our coworkers. So do you purposefully humiliate somebody during report? Are you making sarcastic remarks about something that was or was not done during your offgoing shift? Are you intentionally pointing out mistakes? Now, this one's a little bit tricky because we have to think about intention and tone, right? Which we'll come back to. But are you pointing out a mistake because you are concerned for patient safety? Or are you pointing out an error because you want your coworker to feel bad, to feel like they didn't do something right? That's going to make a huge difference in how you relate to your colleagues. So the other things that they can be are things like passive hostility. These are distrusting other people's opinions, my way or the highway, passive aggressive behavior, protection of professional territory. And this can be both physical space and task. So if you think about, if you're the queen of IVs on your unit, nobody better go to anybody else for an IV except for coming to you, because that is your jam. You are the IV queen. And if somebody goes to somebody else or they have the audacity to try to stick a kid before they come to you, all hell is going to break loose, right? Physical space can be something as silly as, that's Mary's chair. Nobody touches Mary's chair except for Mary. If Mary's on shift, nobody gets to use that chair except for her. I think we've all probably experienced something similar of that in one of our roles or another. I've had somebody with a chair like that. So team sabotage too. They watch what's going on with other team behaviors. They meddle in team dynamics. So if there's like a group that's working really well together to solve a problem, they're going to try to drive a wedge in that for no other reason that why should they be working together without me involved, right? And a lot of the time, these people don't even know that the behaviors that they're engaging in are toxic. So that's where our leaders need to come into play and have these open, honest communications that we'll talk about here in a minute. A lot of it too is these know-it-all behaviors, and it might not even be that they're current on their practice or up to date on their policies and procedures. It's just how they've always done it, and it's their way or the highway. They know what it is, and so you better come to them. And if you don't, again, good luck working around that relationship in the future. The other thing we need to think about is favoritism. So we see a lot of this play out in scheduling. Who does your scheduling? Who makes the assignments? Who signs on-call shifts? Is the same person always getting a weekend off? Is the same person always getting PTO approved? Is there a fair process in place for assigning those things? Or is it truly down to one person or a group of people making those decisions where favoritism can play out? Other people may withhold information during report, especially from other disciplines. When your PT comes around to help, this is a pediatric example, but when your PT comes around to help you get your post-op cardiac kid out of bed into the chair the first time, are you letting them know that the kiddo has a radial art line? Or are you going to hope they notice? And if they don't, too bad for them, because now you've got a kid who's bleeding all over the floor. Are you unapproachable? Other folks may refuse help or wait till the absolute last minute to offer that help and then swoop in, and they're the hero because they were able to fix the problem for you. So toxic environments, a lot of these behaviors factor into toxic environments, right? It's which came first, the chicken or the egg. I tend to think you get a few bad eggs and then a bad chicken grows out of it, because if you've got your leader, the farmer, who comes along and is able to pluck out those sort of bad eggs, hopefully it's only the good ones that hatch and you're stuck with a bunch of good chickens in a good environment. So things like poor communication, information spread only through gossip, no communication from your leaders, no consistent messaging from your leaders, or if leaders participate in gossip. This was something that I've recently witnessed in one of my clinical roles, where a new nurse was promoted up to assistant patient manager or patient care manager. And she'd been on the unit as staff for many years and is really struggling to make the transition from peer to supervisor role. And it is hard to redefine those relationships, but that's where we lean on our additional leaders and our mentors to help us learn how to redefine those boundaries. Because as we'll talk about, boundaries and consistency is really going to be important in helping squash down those toxic behaviors and develop a healthy environment for everybody. So a lack of clarity on policies, procedures, and protocols. And this one doesn't seem like a big deal a lot of the time in terms of toxicity, but it actually is, because it goes back to allowing people the space to say, it's my way or the highway, I'm right, you're wrong, this is how we've always done it. The inability to grow and evolve as an environment and as a team is really an example of toxicity as well. So if there's no accountability for these behaviors, if you've got leaders who either brush it off, aren't aware, choose to look the other way, or frankly, you as an individual aren't willing to hold yourself accountable or your peers accountable for things, these behaviors really can flourish very quickly. A lack of transparency is also an example, right? So if decisions are being made behind closed doors with very little input, that factors back into that burnout. Because remember how we talked about if decisions are being made about your clinical practice and your clinical role, without your input, you start to burn out because you feel like your input and you as a professional are not valuable. Unwelcoming to new staff. We talked about how staff quickly leave if they feel bullied. Cliques form very easily in these environments. Again, thinking back to other places I've worked, I've worked in environments where we had a quote unquote super clique. And it was there, everybody knew it was there, and it was not talked about. And it wasn't pleasant as a new person coming in. So we have the standard bullying, incivility, mistrust, especially of our leaders, a failure to manage staff, high absenteeism, because nobody wants to come in and work in this sort of environment, high turnover, nobody wants to stay in it, and unsafe staffing practices. This includes burning out your staff. If you are always working short, if you are always having to beg your staff to come in, if you're guilting your staff to come in, that is not a safe environment as far as staffing goes or as far as a healthy, non-toxic workplace goes. And that's a hard balance to strike, but as leaders, it's our responsibility to do. So we've already started talking about how burnout and compassion fatigue and toxic behaviors turn into this vicious cycle. The way I like to think of it is when we feel like we are not heard, we're not supported, we're not respected, it's really easy to slip into these behaviors without even noticing, right? If I don't feel like my attending listened to me overnight, if I don't feel like I was supported as a kid was crashing, it's really easy as I'm giving report to the oncoming nurse to just have a mini kvetch session, right? I start going through the laundry list of things that didn't go well on my shift. And I'm guilty of this, especially if I'm coming off of a night shift. I'm not a good night shifter. Thank goodness for all of you who do work nights and work them well. But it's really easy to slip into that, and it's really hard to get out of that. It's like a negativity quicksand. You just sink into it. And then if the person you happen to be talking to agrees with a lot of it, you both start feeding off of each other. And heaven forbid a third person walks up, and before you know it, you forgot you were even reporting off for the night. When we don't feel heard, supported, respected, when norms are broken, if you're asked to go against a policy in place, either because it's old, it's outdated, it's not a good policy, it's not a clear policy, if you're expected to work in unsafe staffing, whether or not the reasons are legitimate, or if you're expected to work without the resources you need to do your job, those things all lead to burnout. And you can see how then that kind of triggers into more toxic behaviors, more of that complaining. You start to take it out on the other people around you, right? I used to have a nursing professor who always to this day says, shit rolls downhill, right? So if we feel like we're getting beat up on, it's a really inappropriate but common coping mechanism that we take that out on the next person. And then they're going to, and it's just going to roll downhill and be this vicious cycle. I'm going to show you a couple examples. These are hopefully a little bit lighter, a little bit more fun. These are some TikTok videos, so I apologize. There are a couple curse words in here, but we've all worked in ICUs. We're no stranger to those. While you're watching these, I'd like you to think about what toxic behaviors are being shown in the videos and just type them into the little chat box. I'll ask our moderator to read them out at the end of the video to see what you guys are able to identify. And then if you've experienced any of these in your workplace, indicate that somehow for me as well. Either put a little asterisk next to it or like an exclamation mark or something just so we know that you've experienced it.
Welcome to gastroenterology. You ready for a report, Mama? Yeah. This patient has rectal hemorrhaging. Is that okay? I'm sure. What was the patient's hemoglobin? Oh, it's low. Just like the number of people who follow you on Twitter. You got any other questions, Mama? Yeah. Why did your husband file for divorce?
Okay, so obviously this is hopefully a very dramatized version of what we've experienced in giving handoff to either somebody else on our unit, hopefully not, or between other units, again, hopefully not. So were we able to identify anything specific in that video that was toxic based on our previous conversation?
Looking for some things to come through. I know certainly just taking some personal jabs is definitely one of the more obvious one there. And just also just sounding like they're just going back and forth complaining about the care that each other gives.
Exactly. Almost seems like they're questioning the other unit's ability to even care for patients. I wouldn't even say, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you just have someone just saying people just being rude to each other.
Yeah, a lot of rudeness. I wouldn't even say passive aggressive. That was just felt like outright aggressive to me.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Has anybody experienced sort of like a toned down version of that in their workplace, or do you all work in very functional workplaces, which I hope you do? I think the perfect example is having worked both NICU and PICU and actually working both at the moment is there's this constant battle, right, between NICU and PICU. PICU thinks NICU doesn't know how to manage their ventilators. NICU thinks PICU doesn't know how to take care of NICU babies. NICU thinks we need to transition to PICU because of developmental reasons. PICU feels like NICU's dumping. It's like this sort of infighting that there doesn't seem to be really good reason for, except for we're both overworked and probably feeling disempowered in our own right.
Yeah, absolutely. We got some people saying there's a focus on personal insults and not patient care.
Yeah.
And just having that feeling of hopelessness and distrust.
Yeah. All right, let's look at the next one. I think it probably is going to ring a little bit more true to us than this very dramatic version of it.
Respiratory. I need respiratory stats. Has anyone seen them? Respiratory. We're a breath of fresh air. Hello, what are they good? This is respiratory, right? Yes, this is Mike from respiratory. Respiratory? It's Mike. Yeah, look. Okay, respiratory. Look, we have an emergency in 708. We need you stat. The RT in the hospital. Okay, drama queen. Look, 708 needs some albuterol. Stats went from 95 to 94%. This is the CHF patient. His crack was all through. Listen, Mike, is it albuterol or albuterol? Just give the damn PRN treatment. You know what PRN is as indicated, not per nurse request, right? Someone's getting written up for that attitude, asshole.
All right, so same thing there, right? As people are writing in their responses, the first couple of things that I notice is how impersonal their interaction was. And I think we're all guilty, especially if you don't know who's carrying either the respiratory phone or the resident phone or our PTOT phone. We're really all guilty of calling and asking, RT, are you available? And I think if there's any RTs or PTOT friends on the line can probably speak to this. It really probably feels very demoralizing, right? I don't even care for it if my patient's parents call me nurse, right? We all have names. We introduce ourselves by them. We'd like to be used by them. Was there anything else that came through while I was yammering on?
Looks like some of the things that people noticed were being demanding.
Yeah.
Sometimes getting attitude when getting or giving report to another unit. Just ask nicely and definitely not being professional to each other.
We don't know what the other person is in the middle of doing, and we all have very different workloads. Our physicians have an entire pod or an entire unit to manage. We as nurses are assigned to 1 to 3 of our patients that we are responsible for. And the units that I work on, the respiratory therapists have multiple units that they're managing. And same with our speech and our physical and our occupational therapists. So they're running all over the place, and who knows what we're interrupting them from. And then additionally, questioning their expertise on a matter, right? We're calling them because that's their specialty. And we're hopefully asking for their input and not just demanding that they do something.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone said they think it's an example of the crap rolling down the hill.
Yeah, for sure.
Awful staffing. Why is there only one RT in the hospital, right?
Horrible hospital. Let's hope it's a very small community hospital, and even that's not great. All right, so the next ones, I'm actually going to show 2 back to back, and I'd like you to think about a comparison between the 2. So look at the tone between the 2 and how both of them make you feel, and if one is more toxic than the other or not. Okay, so that was our first one. All right, so for me, there was a huge difference between the 2. Obviously, the general content here is the same, right? You have a good-looking fellow coming out and saying reasons why doctors are better than nurses, and then blankly listing them off. The first guy looks awfully smug. Our second guy here is smiling through the interaction. The first guy had a very closed-off posture. He came out very stiff and crossed his arms. The second guy was very open and interactive with the screen. And then ultimately, and most importantly, was this message at the bottom that there are none of us are more important. We're both equal and valuable members of the healthcare team. And I really like this comparison because I think it reminds us that we need to remember that our tone can really impact our intended message and how people interpret it, right? So the first guy, to me, at least, my interpretation is that he's very slyly saying that nurses are better than doctors, right? Because he's got this look, he's basically saying there's no way a doctor's better than a nurse. Where the second guy was just more open and still had the same pointing at nothing, but he summed it up very well. And he just seemed more, like I said, open and engaging than the first guy did, who seemed a little bit more standoffish. Would folks on the audience side agree with that or have anything else that they noticed, or do they disagree?
Yeah, we definitely have a lot of comments from our group. We've got some people, we have Remya saying attitude across units, the NICU PICU drama is definitely real. Currently facing that with NICU general peds because we are decompressing to peds and it's mostly our babies with NAS. So peds feels like they're being dumped on with crying babies or difficult families that the NICU doesn't want. Liz Zimmerman just says it's just rude and no disrespect. Backbiting, disregard for the other profession. Lori says she thought it was just their NICU PICU relations there. Lori, she works with an RT who wore a sticker over his name badge saying, "My name isn't Artie." Let's see, Kimberly says, the non-emergent call. I've recently had some nurses complain that when they were team lead, that some people definitely abuse the demands. One nurse called emergently for our lead to come across the hospital to help her. When the team lead got to the room, the nurse wanted her to warm her milk. It was pretty frustrating because this particular person does this a lot.
Yeah.
And then someone just also comments, disregarding recommendations is a real struggle. One of the most frustrating parts of the job is being asked for a recommendation about a feeding, and then it's just ignored.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's all very real stuff. And these are all the sorts of toxic behaviors that we're talking about, right? Yeah, you're not alone. I've experienced a lot of those and I've worked a lot of places. And unfortunately, they do seem to be really pervasive. So I guess that it's a nice transition into, so our behaviors are toxic. What do we do? How can we break that cycle? And it's not all on us as individuals, although we're all here at this one conference because we believe that we are here and each of us can make a significant difference in our patients' lives and on our teams. So as we talk about these next few slides, let's all think about what behaviors we're guilty of and at our worst. And I've already shared with you, I can be particularly sarcastic and snarky, especially coming off of a bad shift or a night shift. And I have to check that myself too. And I think that's part of that accountability that we're going to speak about. It is all of our responsibility. It's not just us on individuals as bedside practitioners, but a lot of this boils down to the culture that our leaders create and the accountability that our leaders put into place. and our organizational systems as well. So what does our organization believe about these sort of things, and how do they handle them overall? So what can we do as individual staff members? So we have to call out our own behavior, right? Nobody wants to put themselves on the spot. They don't want to call their friends out, but it is our responsibility to do that. So for me, one thing that I've found really helpful, if I sort of find myself in that negativity quicksand, is I say, wow, my attitude really sucks this morning. I'm sorry, I'm going to take a quick walk around the unit. I'll come back if I'm able to do that. If it's report, I'll say, hey, let's just get through report. I know you've had a long night, or you're ready to get your day started, and just reset, right? Put a new tone on it. I had a friend who said the way she likes to reframe it is, okay, so we've talked about a lot of negative stuff. What's something that you're proud of? What's a positive thing that happened on your shift? Depending on the person you're handling, myself included, I'm not so sure that I'd be so keen on that approach, but it is a good one depending on what your audience is. So we are also responsible to model positive change. So especially if you're a senior staff member, if you're precepting somebody, if you're in charge, it's on you to help set the tone for the day. And that's not easy to do all the time, but it really does make a difference, because it's a lot harder to be a negative person if you have nobody else to be negative to or with. So we're also going to be open to giving and receiving feedback. So I like to give and receive feedback as close to in the moment as possible. This was something that I really took to heart when I was in a leadership role. It's not easy to do. Nobody likes to have those conversations. I don't think you'll find anybody who's, yeah, you know what conversations I love? Critical conversations, let's go do it. But we have to. And I think the closer to the moment you can do, the less you as the sort of the providing feedback person will be able to fester and let it just boil up and turn into this gross abscess. And you can help them change the behavior in the moment, rather than them like having to look back and think about it and be like, yeah, I don't remember doing that, right? Similarly, if you're the person receiving feedback, do so with gratitude. Don't make excuses, don't deflect, don't blame. Take it with the assumption that it was given to you with good intention, right? We talked about intention before. That's really important. Now, I will add the caveat here that if you're in a life-threatening moment, we throw out the don't do it in front of other colleagues, don't do it in front of patients or families, because if it's going to impact patient care that dramatically, we do need to handle it in the moment. So my leaders, what can we do? So your job is really a hard one, because you're stuck between your staff and you're stuck between the organizational heads, right? And that's not an easy thing to balance. And shifting culture, even if it's just on a unit as opposed to an organization, it's not quick and it's not easy. It was one of the biggest, most challenging things I found as I went into leadership roles. So we're going to treat the cause, not the symptoms, right? Just like our patients. Treating the symptoms is nice, but you're just correcting a number. But if you're not fixing the problem itself, you're going to be doing the same thing a month later. So the biggest thing you can do, especially if you're coming into a new team, is you're going to set clear expectations and boundaries. And I mean that for you and your staff. So they need to know from you how often and what kind of communication to expect. So one of the biggest things I laid out for my staff when I started was, you never have to tell me why you can't work extra, but please just respond to my text. And I got everybody to answer, even if it was a no, but then I need to move to the next person. We don't want to create guilt, because that's reinforcing unhealthy work-life balance, right? We all have those critical staffing moments, but making somebody feel bad for not coming in isn't going to make them more willing to do so. The other things, we set expectations and boundaries about our physical space as well. So if we think about Mary and her chair again, you as a leader can say, hey, Mary, I've noticed that you really like to stake claim on this chair. It's a busy unit. It's not just a chair for you. It's a unit chair. We're not going to have this conversation again, because this is not how we behave on our unit. And just line it out for her and let her know what the norm for your unit is. Now, is that a pleasant conversation to have or an easy conversation? No, but it is one that needs to be had. Need to be direct and clear with your staff. What changes are coming? Follow up on the inquiries they send you. People get really nervous and really anxious when they don't know what to expect and feel like those decisions are being made without them. I know sometimes decisions can't be made with staff, but especially if they're being made for staff, it is helpful to at least let them know that something is in process, if you can at least share that much, and then you'll circle back to them when you have more information. So we as leaders have shortcomings too, right? Like, I've forgotten to circle back to staff and they called me out on it, and all I could do was apologize and tell them that it wouldn't happen again. and really try to work on that behavior of mine. Another thing that's really helpful are positive walking rounds. So the Joint Commission just published a paper a couple weeks ago that showed a 32 to 45% improvement in emotional wellness of staff and a decrease in toxic behaviors just by leaders walking the unit for positive rounds. We're not checking our whiteboards, we're not checking off safety checks, we're not doing any of that. We're just checking in with our staff and gauging the mood of the unit. What are the problems? What's toxic? What's good? What's going well? What's not? And really just having those engaging conversations with our team in the moment. We also want to try to prioritize our staff's concerns, right? We always harp on, please submit safety events, please submit UOs, unusual occurrences, but what are we doing with that information? I've worked in environments where it's gone into a black hole and I've never heard about it again. I've worked in environments where it's been summarized and shared with staff once every other week or once a month, and we knew that our concerns were actually being taken seriously. So as a leader, how would you rather have somebody handle that with you if you were on the staff side of things? Just that open communication really goes a long way. And it helps eliminate a lot of that gossip, really. Because remember, if you don't have solid information coming down and a consistent message coming across, it's really easy for gossip to start and really easy for assumptions to start. And that gets negative and it gets ugly really, really fast. So as an organization, what does that mean? If you guys could, in the chat box, share with me some of your organization's core values, that would be awesome. Because we all know that our organizations love their core values. We hear about them from the second we put in an application to every single corporate email that comes out from our organization, right? But our hospitals need to be living by those core values. Do we have any coming through?
Looks like we have a couple coming through. Diane Wilson says compassion.
Yeah.
Sharon says human kindness.
Those two are great. Right out the gate, I'm like, okay, so we're compassionate and we're kind to our patients. But are we compassionate and kind to our staff as well, right? Because we're humans as well. So we have our own stuff going on outside of work, and it's organizational culture about whether or not our leaders are sort of allowed to respect us as whole human beings and not just people who come in and punch the clock.
Absolutely. We also have innovation. Jan says compassion, accountability, respect, excellence, and safety.
Yeah. So all of the same stuff that we're talking about, all of the things that we expect from our caregivers to our patients, our organization should expect those same things from the organization and leaders to our staff. That's the fair and equitable thing. And that's how you're going to help develop a really healthy environment. If your staff don't feel like you as an organization and your leaders, and frankly, peer-to-peer staff are living those core values as opposed to just knowing them to recite off when somebody in a presentation on a Friday night asks you for them, what's the point of even having them? So the other thing we're thinking about is respectful engagement. So this includes things like leadership development. We all like to think that we're just either born a leader or not. And the dirty, rotten truth is that it takes a lot of work to become a good leader. It's a lot of reading. It's a lot of mentorship. Hopefully you have some good mentors who can help you through those tricky conversations. And it's performance improvement for everybody. It's our staff, it's our leaders. And what does performance improvement look like? It's not just writing something down on your annual eval saying you'll go to a conference once a year. It's truly constructive guidance and feedback, and most importantly, coaching. And that goes to our leaders as well. Because leaders who are especially new to an organization or new to leading can't be expected to just know how to do this off the bat. That's a really unfair assumption. Just like it's really unfair to expect staff to not engage in these toxic behaviors within a toxic environment. So one of the things that's really big right now is these zero tolerance environments, right? What does that look like? So zero tolerance, I think, easily is enforced between peer-to-peer interactions, right? I think that's pretty well established. But what happens if it's your supervisor or your leader who's the toxic person? If your organization truly is a zero tolerance organization, you should be comfortable going to your HR rep. You should feel comfortable going to the next in the chain command. You should know who those people are and be able to have those conversations. And I think, unfortunately, this is one that there's a lot of, you talk the talk, but you don't walk the walk, because I can tell you most people I work with would not feel comfortable going above their unit manager to report toxic behavior, even if it was a pattern. So what I encourage people to do, if it is your leader, whether you're in a management role or whether you are in a staff role, if your supervisor is having these toxic behaviors towards you or you're witnessing them towards other people, document, just like everything else we do in healthcare. If it's not documented, it didn't happen. Date, time, a general objective statement, just like we write in our SOAP notes of what happened. And if you have one single person you can confide in that you know won't spread it around as gossip, a charge nurse, a shift coordinator, perhaps a unit director over another department that you trust and respect and has been a mentor to you, that's really going to be helpful just in case you do need to escalate further because you'll have that evidence. So on that really bummer of a note, good or bad, we're all in it together, right? So by putting the behaviors we discussed in place, we can give our teams back some of the power and we can engage them. These two things have been shown to prevent, decrease, and heal burnout and compassion fatigue. Being clear about our expectations and, more importantly, holding people accountable in fair and equitable ways makes it less likely that staff will engage in these negative behavior and toxic behaviors. Ultimately, our goal here is to improve our workplace and our patient care. And if we all put in the time and we all hold ourselves and each other accountable, we really can make our workplaces healthy. So thank you all for spending your Friday evening with me. If you have any questions about this material or feel like I could be helpful to you in your organization, please do reach out. I'd be happy to have a conversation with you. My contact information is there. Please save it and use it. And if you have any questions, I can take those now.
Thanks so much, Claire. That was an amazing presentation. We've got a lot of comments. Sharon says, OMG, I wish I heard this 5 years ago. Also, Ramya was asking if you could share the articles that you mentioned through the presentation. She would love to read the Joint Commission articles about toxic behaviors.
Yeah, for sure. What I can do, I think the easiest thing would probably be to send them to Kathy and she can distribute them that way.
So just some of the comments that we have from pharmacy. I love it when we put in a med order that's not life-threatening, but after 20 minutes, people are calling to ask where it is. If they had to answer the phone, they can't make the med. That's from Anne. Someone mentioned when we have to look into ourselves as well. For every toxic behavior I experience, there's probably something I do. Am I drawing a certain behavior from the other person?
Yeah, I think that's really insightful. I don't know that it's always that you're drawing, but I do think we have to be on the lookout for, like I said, getting sucked into that sort of negative, toxic quicksand. Some people are just, they're going to have these behaviors and they're theirs to own. And I think as long as you're on the lookout for your own and doing your own accountability and your own check-ins, and just the fact that this is your comment walking away from this presentation tells me that you are. I don't think it's always an equal, one behavior equals another behavior.
And then just to talk about Mary again, Sally Hasten was saying, I might ask Mary why that's her chair. Might be surprised by her rationale. Might be away from the bright lights that give her migraines. I didn't mind giving her the chair then.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that goes to empathy and sympathy and some compassion and just excellence in our relationships with our coworkers too.
Absolutely. And Ramya mentions reporting behavior. It's very challenging to do real-time conversations at the bedside as a therapist and then go back to work with the same RN for another baby the next hour, the next day.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's one of the biggest things that is challenging about fixing toxic environments and toxic relationships is we all do have to turn around and continue to work with each other. I always use this answer on job interviews because I think it's a great example of this. I had started in a PICU and had taken care of a really sick kid. It was a NICU graduate with pulmonary hypertension and was in a pulmonary hypertension crisis. And I was actually in the middle of resecuring an arterial line. The attending physician kind of walked in about halfway through us intervening, and we were doing what we needed to do to stabilize the kid while realizing we had an unsecured arterial line. She came in, said a couple of things under her breath, and then stormed out. And about 20 minutes later, the nursing educator came and sat me down and asked me how things were going because the attending had complained about how I was intervening on the kid. And I was able to sit down and say I had done A, B, and C. My next steps were 1, 2, and 3. And the educator was like, yeah, no, that sounds appropriate. And I went back to the attending and just said, I heard you had some concerns. Let's talk this through together. And frankly, I think she was just really taken aback that I did that because I didn't get the impression that anybody else ever had. And she had a reputation for doing this where she would complain about the nurses behind us to the educator. And I similarly thought I was never going to be able to have a working relationship with her. And I was quite surprised that we ended up having a cordial working relationship for the rest of her tenure at the organization. And that's best case scenario, right? Worst case is it spirals into this continued toxic behavior when then you have retaliation and things. And that's when you really have to keep track of what happened, when happened, who'd you tell about it. And maybe that's not the day that you want to have that in the moment conversation, but at least letting somebody know that this thing happened so you can start to track a pattern. And maybe if you don't feel comfortable saying it after the first interaction, you give them the benefit of the doubt. Mary had a bad day. She's got a migraine because she didn't get her chair. You know, that second time it happens, you can say, hey, you said the same thing last week and I'm not really sure what's going on. Can we talk about it when you have a minute? Like I can circle back after my next patient or whatever happens to be, because otherwise it's just going to fester, you know, and it's not fair to you, the therapist, to have to work with this nurse having not had that conversation either, because you're going to feel that. That's going to sit in the pit of your stomach for the rest of the day, whether or not you have that conversation, you know. So I think it is a balance, and it is a tricky thing that we all have to continue to work with each other in these sort of high acuity environments, but not addressing it doesn't fix anything either. So it's just figuring out the best time to do it. And that's when you do hope you have leaders who are supportive to help you through those, sort of navigate through those conversations.
Absolutely. And it's like Jacqueline says, we have a bonding through birching problem.
A bonding through birching?
Not sure.
I'm not sure what that is. Oh, do you mean bonding through birching?
Trying to keep it PG, but
yeah, okay, got you. Yeah, no, I think that is definitely an issue we have throughout healthcare, right? We all, even pre-COVID, we'd all go out for our drinks with our coworkers and sort of try to one-up each other with our horror stories. And that is hard. I think there's some good and there's some therapeutic in getting that out and sharing it in a space. But I think the important thing, if that's what we're choosing to do with our sort of core group of confidants, is that then after it's out, it's wiped away, and we can come back to the workplace and interact with those same people in a very healthy way. And it's not just like continuing to whisper behind each other's backs with all the new dirt that you got from the night out over margaritas, because there is definitely some good to clearing the air and just getting it all out. But I think there's also a difference between complaining about a bad day or a few bad shifts with a bunch of your confidants from work and using that to stock your arsenal, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And Claire, I think if you go ahead and end your presentation, you'll be able to see the rest of us.
Okay. Forgive me. There we go. Hi.
Hi. I think that was the questions that we had, more so the conversation that we had at the end of that presentation, which was absolutely amazing. Thank you, Claire, for presenting that.
Thank you all for the great questions and the engagement. It makes things go so much smoother when people actually are participating. And I'm happy to hear that we've all had some shared experiences, even if they weren't necessarily positive ones. I think just knowing that other people are dealing with the same sort of rivalries and nonsense across the board, there's something therapeutic in that too.
I think so too. I think that's part of this community, right? Discussing even the products that we're missing or whatever it is that somebody can commiserate with you. I think that's part of being in this shared environment. And I think this was an amazing presentation and just discussion, because it is well known. I don't know about you guys, but when in every NICU that I've been in, it's, oh, the NICU eat their young. Like, how is that an acceptable? How is that acceptable? How are we not fostering new nurses and instead known as like vicious nurses who eat their young?
Especially when we're the ones who like swaddle so well. Swings.
What do you mean?
So true.
That's so horrible.
Yeah.
Instead of inspiring people to join us, it's, oh no, don't go here. Basically, you've got like the toxic X on you. We're the hazard. We're the biohazard in the hospital. And I think you're bringing that into how management, really having someone in management hold people accountable is huge.
Yeah, accountability is really a big piece. And like I said in the presentation, and we've talked about even in after the questions, it's not all management's responsibility. It's not all your responsibility as an individual. It's not just the organization's responsibility to set those zero tolerance policies. It really has to be, like everything we do, a holistic approach.
Yeah, so
Absolutely.
true.
So true.
I think
I love that.
laughter is one of the things that sometimes we forget too.
Yeah.
One of the great de-stressors, the the most stressful things that can happen. If you can have a little bit of just a debrief and laugh about it, always helps to make things a little bit better.
Absolutely. And celebrating the wins too, right?
Yeah.
Because I think it's really easy to get hung up in the negative. And that's true of our workplace and our personal lives and our relationships and everything. We have to remember to focus on the positive. We do some really good work and we come together as a team. Even in the worst of environments that we've worked in, I think when it really has come down to it, we've been able to rally together and save that kid or save that mom and get what needs to get done. And we need to hang on to those moments and celebrate what we do well. So one of the things that I've implemented other places that I've been in leadership positions as part of our code debrief form is not only we go through the code itself, right? What we actually did for the kid, but what we did, what we can improve upon, but also what we did well. And then we celebrate those wins. And I think that's hugely important.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Claire, I thought your presentation was great. This is Jane. I'm so sorry that my camera's not working, but you can hear me, right?
Yes, I can.
One of the things I thought was really helpful about your presentation too is I think it doesn't matter what NICU you go to, you always find the same sorts of people, right? You have the person that is always willing to come in, is always happy, and you're happy that they're on the shift. And then you have the Barbaras that Mary Coughlin calls, and they just know everything, and they're just very difficult to work with. And sometimes when I hear our nurses being a little disgruntled, and they're like, I'm going to work over here, and I'm going to work in this NICU, I tell them, why can't we just make our NICU better? Because you're going to meet the same people no matter where you go, because people are people. So it's really more empowering if we can just make our unit better. And that all comes down to what you were talking about. But there's always that threat of I'm going somewhere else. And sometimes I feel like after 5 times of the nurse telling me that, I almost want them to go somewhere else. Go try it. See how you'll see that the good and the bad. And that at the end of the day, it's really about you. How are you going to, how about you being the one in making a decision how you're going to come in? But I love what you said, and this is one of the things I talk to Kathy about all the time, is just at the bedside, nurses have so many brilliant ideas. And if someone could just take 5 minutes to listen to a suggestion that they have and actually maybe even try to make that suggestion something workable, it's so empowering for them. They're not asking for a huge raise. They're just asking for, can we get different NG tubes because these don't work? It's really, it's never personal. It's not about money and about vacation time. It's just about their ideas for improvement of care. And sometimes we just don't take any time to listen to that. And I know that's the whole premise of the one conference.
And frankly, sometimes it is about the vacation time, right? Like we need to allow our staff to have that time away from the bedside too, because we can't come back and be healthy, engaged human beings if we have nothing left to give. And I actually had this on one of my slides and realized I was behind time, so I didn't share it. But since we're all here chatting anyway, I'll share it. One of the last leadership roles I was in was actually a unique position. And as I was hired and signed my contract, there was not a call requirement and there was no requirement to carry your phone or pager. So I was like, okay, awesome. Like I'll work my 50-hour work week. It'll be fine. Like I'll be available for emergencies. My staff has my personal cell if they need anything. Fine, great. Show up on the first day, get handed the call phone. And I said, okay, what are the responsibilities that go with this? And they're like, answer it 24/7. Okay. And it ended up being, I couldn't even tell you how many times I got called in, not only for emergencies, but to be in staffing because we had a call in or we were short because we just didn't have enough nurses scheduled or whatever it happened to be. And after a few months of this, it was Christmas time. We took our kids to chop down a Christmas tree. And our little one goes, are you really taking both your phones today? And it hit me in such a way because I knew I hated that second phone, right? Oh man, it woke me up all the time. It was the worst. Who wants to carry 2 phones around? But the fact that my at the time 6-year-old was so in tune with the fact that nothing good came of that phone really said something. So I went in the next day and I, through a weird report structure, reported to the chief medical officer of the hospital. And so I was like, listen, we need to have a conversation about this. I said, I have no problem carrying the on-call phone, but I need 24 hours a week or I am unreachable. Just to reset, recharge, be fully engaged with my family. I thought 24 hours in a week was pretty darn reasonable. And I was told that I was absolutely out of line that it was an unreasonable request, that I needed to be grateful for the privilege of taking care of children. And I said, okay, I'm going to start looking for a new job. And it all boils down to our leaders. And I don't mean to pick on our leaders on the call, but this does come from a leadership standpoint a lot of the times. It's, you're here, this is your job. What will we do if you don't? Well, if you can't come in, I guess we'll just drown. Oh, I don't know what we're going to do. And I think the final thing he said to me was, I guess if you can't do the job, you just can't do the job. And I was like, well, I guess I can't do this job. I'm not going to do this job. And, you know, I think it just goes to show, like, we have to allow our people that time to recover and do that really important self-care. Maybe for you that is a bubble bath. For other people, it's watching 4 hours of Game of Thrones in a row or whatever it happens to be. But we have to allow space for that. So we can come back and have those really brilliant, engaging ideas. Because if we're just trying to get through the day, we're not going to have them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love this conversation so much. I always say at the One Conference, this is about filling our hearts and our heads. And I feel like, Claire, you really delivered on my intention to just shine a light on this really important topic and to balance it with our really amazing clinical presentations. And really today was that like heart and head. And I love ending with this on this Friday of our last weekend. And anybody who's watching the recording, I hope that this does fill your cup. I know you guys come for really good neuro content, but I feel like in order to deliver that care that Jan talked so beautifully about, and the way that Diane showed us all the things we intend to do well and to do better, we can't do that when we're empty. And so I love that we were able to wrap with this and reset us as we head into the final day, where we're going to talk about some more amazing presentations tomorrow, and then wrap up the day tomorrow with that roundtable where you all get to choose that one thing that is going to be your thing that you're going to work on. And so we've had some great examples of that with Jan, with what they've done in their unit, coming to the One Conference and then going back and doing so many amazing things.
Wouldn't have done it without you.
Oh, you're so kind. But and then Kim tomorrow is going to talk about what they did from their unit with kangaroo care. It's just, you guys are doing such amazing things, all of you. And I love how engaged you guys have all been. And I love our presenters and this amazing panel of our planning committee who've been here tonight as well. I think, Shannon, you're going to open up the social hour. She's our diehard party girl. And so if you're in the app, you just go and press that button at the bottom that says complete and continue. And that will take you to the Zoom room link and just go through to that if you're going to stay on and join us live. Otherwise, just, I don't know if anybody else has any final words, but just thank you all. Thank you to this amazing group of presenters and our amazing planning committee who've helped make all of this. Natalie, you did an amazing job moderating all afternoon. So what a great afternoon or evening. I know some of you girls it's late night for you. You've had a long day. But that's all I've got. Anybody else have any final words?
No, I think that's it.
That's it.
Wow.
Thank you all.
Thanks again, everybody.
Bye.
Good night. Well, that's it. I hope that you enjoyed this presentation and really learned a lot from Claire and from the conversation we had with the One Conference community back in 2021 at our online live event in the middle of the pandemic. This wraps up this month's theme on social and emotional caring in the NICU. If you haven't watched the other webinars, you can watch those here on our YouTube channel. And if you want some of the notes and resources that we've shared throughout the month, as well as the slides and articles and all sorts of things, just go ahead and click the QR code here on the screen and we'll get those over to you right away. So stay tuned for next month. We have a whole new series coming your way. For now, bye.